It is truly an honor to be with you today and have the pleasure of introducing to you an amazing lady, retired Colonel Patricia S. Blassie, U.S. Air Force. With 40 collective years of service, Colonel Blassie has served our country in a variety of military capacities and has received numerous awards and decorations. Colonel Patricia S. Blassie retired militarily on July 31st, 2018, while serving as the Deputy Director, Directorate of Manpower, Personnel, and Services of Headquarters Air Force Reserve Command, Robins Air Force Base. She continued to serve in this capacity as a federal employee until December 31st, 2019. Other significant achievements include in January of 1997, Colonel Blassie departed from her full-time Air Reserve Technician position as the 94th Airlift Wing Chief of Public Affairs, Dobbins Air Reserve Base, Georgia, after being hired as a civilian employee serving as a communications specialist within Cobb County Government's Personnel Department. At the same time, and in order to continue her military career as an Air Force reservist, she also accepted a position within the Secretary of the Air Force Public Affairs, the Pentagon, as an individual mobilization, augmentee, IMA, and during this time, Colonel Blassie later served as the Cobb County Director of Operations, working within the Cobb County Manager's Office. She was very active in the community, enhanced Cobb's focus on customer service, and also served on a committee researching the concept of a public safety village, which became a reality and is named the David Hankerson Safety Village. Additionally, she received major awards and decorations, including the Legion of Merit, Meritorious Service Medal with 4 oak leaf clusters, Air Force Commendation Medal with 2 oak leaf clusters, Air Force Achievement Medal with 2 oak leaf clusters, Air Force Outstanding Unit Award with 4 oak leaf clusters, Air Force Good Conduct Medal, Air Force Forces Meritorious Service Medal with 1 oak leaf cluster, National Defense Service Medal, and the Global War on Terrorism Service Medal. Let's give Colonel Blassie a nice warm welcome back to Cobb County as we listen to her story and embark on an incredible journey with her in the recovery of her brother's identity. God bless you all.
Well, good morning, everyone. I'm not sure I have the words to describe the feeling of coming back to Cobb County. As I was driving here from Destin yesterday, and came into the area, you just start remembering so many things, and thoughts and experiences came flooding back. And even this morning, driving by the Big Chicken, I was just so excited because back in the day, we had to fight for that Big Chicken to stay. It was a big deal. There's so many thoughts that I want to share with you today, but I couldn't name everyone here today. You're so many dignitaries from the base, from Cobb County government, from the chamber, friends that had supported my family and me while we went to go find my brother Michael. I can't express as deeply what it means to me to have had that support during one of the most trying times in my life. And I was working for Cobb County government at the time. And Sheila Buckner and David Hankerson and Chairman Byrne and the other directors throughout the county and colleagues that I worked with so closely who just kept encouraging me, even though it was just, I had to keep asking off work. I had never had to share my personal life or have any time off anytime I was working, and that was very difficult for me. But when it came down to my family, it was the most important thing, and that's what Mr. Hankerson and the rest of the leadership said, you just got to go, just go, you'll be fine. But I had only worked there a year. But when I came to Cobb County, it was in 1987. I was enlisted for 11 years before I received my commission in 1989. The Air Force told me that you will receive travel, training, and an education. I was 17 when I raised my hand to join. And I got to tell you, they came through with all of that travel, training, and an education. And it's foundational to my career and what I was able to do to help my family as we confronted the United States government with this effort to bring Michael home. When I arrived in '87, the prison riots were going on. Bill Elliott was in a midair collision, flying in F-15s out of Dobbins when the Air National Guard was flying F-15s there. 1991, we took media to Bosnia on C-130s. 1993, the Lockheed L-100 crash, we handled that out of Dobbins, working with the media, working with Congressional. We won the top Air Force Public Affairs Award for a small base because of our programs, and honorary commanders was integral to our community relations, media relations, internal relations, congressional relations. That was in '93. We handled the Olympics out of Dobbins, all the presidents and vice presidents and all of the activity back in '96. I went through Leadership Cobb while I was here, learning so much about the community. And then I believe it was '95, the BRAC came and they wanted to consider Dobbins, and we all came together working with Cobb Chamber and Cobb County government and stood strong to save the base. There was some BRAC initiatives, but we were able to keep that incredible area. And then, as the commissioner said, I had done so much as an Air Reserve technician, a dual status technician, that I thought I needed to step out. Leadership was changing at Dobbins. I had gone through so much, and some of the programs were the same, but and then the honorary commanders program, it was just off the chart. It was the premier community relations program in our Air Force. And I remember early 90s, there was some talk about the support that we were receiving or not receiving from the Air Force Reserve Command at Robbins. And so we put together a briefing. General Whitnell was the base commander at the time, and we went down to Robbins to brief the commanding officer of the Air Force Reserve Command to express to him the importance of this program. And so there was just so much to trying to make sure that there were education and understanding, both militarily and on the civilian side, to move forward so that we could continue this relationship that was so important. But anyway, it was at that time that I decided to branch out, and Cobb County government was so kind to give me the opportunity to work there. And we had some incredible experiences, Mr. Hankerson. But I, again, learned more about government, and it was important for me to do so. But at the same time, as the commissioner mentioned, I was a reservist assigned to the Pentagon as an individual mobilization augmentee. So in 1997, I was assigned up there. I would go to do my reserve duty at the Pentagon, which was very, very important as well during this process that I'm going to talk to you about with regard to my brother. So thank you again for the opportunity, and so we'll just go ahead and get started here. I show this cartoon to start off the program because Mr. Bill Keene, as you all have heard of him and have seen Family Circus for years, in November of 1997 published this cartoon. And it has one of the small guys, the children, looking at the Tomb of the Unknowns and saying, why don't they check his DNA? And I was like, I called Mr. Keene and I said, did you know what my family was about to do when you wrote this cartoon? And he said, no, I really did believe that someday that a child would ask the question. But he also went on to say, but it was the most controversial cartoon that I had ever published to that date. Because who would question the Tomb of the Unknowns? Who would even think to disrupt sacred ground? So I understood that why it was probably his most controversial cartoon, because it was a very controversial situation that my family and I found ourselves in. So a little bit about Michael. We were born in a lower middle income family in St. Louis. He was the firstborn to George and Jean Blassie. He was an excellent soccer player, tennis. He played in the band. He sold newspapers, hard worker, very athletic, as I mentioned. And he received an appointment to the Air Force Academy. He was part of the class of 1970. He fell in love with flying while he was there. And when he graduated that year from the academy, those are the kind of vacations that we were able to take. We all got in the car and we drove to Colorado Springs to see him graduate that year. And we were so proud because he was the only one, Blassie, that had left St. Louis and was so accomplished in that way. And then the next time we got in a car is the next year after he received his pilot rings at pilot training at Columbus Air Force Base, Mississippi. Aunts and uncles, cousins, we all went there to celebrate with Michael. And that was my brother George, who George is the youngest, and so looked up to Michael in so many ways. So we were extremely proud of Michael. But a little side, if you look at Michael's hair and mustache, he was always doing stuff to the limit. And that's what I understand even about his time at the academy. He walked a lot of drills, is what I understand, as I've gotten to know some of his classmates in the last year. After he got his wings, he went off to survival training. He flew with the 8th Special Operations Squadron out of Ben Hoa Air Base in Vietnam, and he flew the A-37 Dragonfly. It's an attack aircraft. The A-10 replaced the A-37. I remember when we went to the airport, it was back in the day. I keep sort of dating myself, but you could go to the gate. And we would say, oh, goodbye, Michael. Well, I was 14, he was 24. And my family wasn't the kind of family that really discussed the war. I know my mother and father must have been very concerned, but it wasn't something that was highlighted in my mind. I just knew that Michael, I would see him again, and we said goodbye, and it was a wonderful time, and we were celebrating him. And then the other thing about the class of 70, they all knew when they graduated they would be going to Vietnam. And that was a hard thing for me as I studied the Vietnam War when I went to the Air War College. Studying that war, it's very, very difficult because of the dynamics surrounding it and some of the things that happened. And they studied it, and they were serving at the time, and they were still willing to serve their country and go. And that is honorable for any service member to answer the call, no matter what the circumstances are, right? So it was On his 132nd mission, he arrived in Vietnam on January 31st of 72. He was on his 132nd mission on May 11th of 1972. It was one of the most intense battles of the Vietnam War. It was the Battle of An Loc. And the flight lead, there were two A-37s. The flight lead had gone in and came up, and then it was Michael who was going in. And Jim Connolly, who was a major at the time, described the mission as he saw Michael's aircraft get hit by ground enemy fire. It began streaming fuel, and because these aircraft fly so low to drop their bombs, that is how they're able to be hit by ground enemy fire. But he saw the aircraft begin streaming fuel. There was no communication from Michael. He did not see Michael eject from the aircraft. His plane went in, inverted, and went down. It was a bad day for the Blassie family, but it was a bad day for many, as I've gotten to know about that battle on May 11th of 1972. The helicopters that normally go in to get you or to bring you out if you're alive, or to get your remains, to find your remains and bring you out, they went in, but the battle, as I was saying, was so intense, their lives were in jeopardy. So they saw no sign of life, but they were not able to bring the remains out. And that is what the Air Force team that came to my family's home, just as you would see in the movies, it's 3 people dressed in their service dress to come to tell the family that something has happened to their family member. It was pretty devastating. So I had left school early that day, and I was at home because I had a doctor's appointment. I wasn't supposed to be home early, but I looked out the window and saw my mother and father was out there with some Air Force people, and I was like, this is really strange. It was in the middle of the day. So I went to the backyard, and I was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to get caught. I'm not supposed to be here right now. I didn't know what to do. And Mrs. Leeser, who was across the street, and she knew everything that was always going on in the neighborhood, she came to the backyard and she said, Pat, you need to go inside. And so I went inside, and that is when they said, well, Michael was killed in Vietnam, and it was just, it's hard to describe because of the way we looked at Michael. He was the firstborn. Then my mother and father, they're not supposed to have favorites and or love anybody more than others, but there's something about a firstborn. But it wasn't just for my mother and father, it was for all 4 of us. We looked up to him. He was a great man. And so this is what they told us about Michael's last mission. It was Operation Linebacker 1. He was shot down by ground enemy fire, as I mentioned, 60 miles north of Saigon in An Loc. His body could not be recovered, so his designation was killed in action and body not recovered. This is a newspaper article after he was shot down in the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. He had a girlfriend that we thought he would marry. Her name was Lou, and he wrote to her a letter, and in the second column at the bottom, his quote that to her was, why am I trying to live if I'm just living to die? I'll keep on living to fight as long as there's a fighting reason to live or for others to live. So he went into Vietnam, really wanting to make a difference, and we were very proud of his service and all that he represented. So I'm going to skip forward. That was May 11th of 1972. I'm going to skip forward to June 8th of 1973. They dedicated a building in Michael's honor called Blassie Hall at Columbus Air Force Base, where he went to pilot training. We all got back in the car, and with aunts and uncles, and we all drove to Mississippi, and it was a proud moment. But it was a tough moment because there was no recovery. And a family like mine, which is so interesting, you know somebody's not coming home, but then you don't talk about it. Nobody talked about it. We didn't talk about Michael. It just was like, well, it was very, very strange when I look back. But anyway, but when things happened about Michael, we were all there. So, and then in 1976 is when I enlisted in the Air Force. And so some people say, well, is it because of Michael's service? And I was like, well, no, they told me I'd get travel, training, and education. I chose the Air Force because Michael had served in the Air Force, but it took me time to understand the level of service that our airmen and soldiers and sailors and Marines give to our nation. It took time for me to grow into that. So that was 1973. Now I'm going to go to 1984, where there was an incredible ceremony going on. If you look back, it really started in 1982, where there was a push for Vietnam Unknown. It was the only war that did not have an unknown soldier up at the Tomb of the Unknowns. And so, and the interesting part is, it was the January of 1973 is when Congress directed that there would be an unknown soldier from the Vietnam War. So that was in 73. So now we're up to 82. There's the push. All of the veterans organizations were pushing. There were petitions. That they didn't inter in 82, but President Reagan selected an unknown to be interred Memorial Day of 1984. So when we were still in Vietnam, the mortuary for us was in Saigon. When we pulled out of Vietnam, the mortuary was moved to Thailand. And then when we completely pulled out, the mortuary was moved to Hawaii. And so that is where the unknown soldier was selected. He was put on a ship, and they sailed to California, where the unknown soldier laid in state at Travis Air Force Base in the chapel there. He was then put on a C-141 aircraft and flown to our nation's capital and laid in state at the Capitol. And then on that Memorial Day, hundreds of thousands of people came out to honor our Vietnam veterans like we had never honored them before. You all are well aware that we did not treat our Vietnam veterans very well. And what I stand strong with the Vietnam veterans who taught us that no other veterans, those who serve their country, will ever be treated like we treated the Vietnam vets. And they are the ones why we go to airports now and honor people who wear that uniform. So I'm very, very proud. But they went out to honor one of their own. There were hundreds of thousands, and it was a grand day. President Reagan wanted to help heal the country in his own way, and this was part of it. You'll notice that it's a multi-service color guard that represented and surrounded the casket at the Tomb of the Unknowns that day. President Reagan presided over the ceremony. It's at this time, and he made a speech there, and you may have read it before, or some of you may have been there. But he said, "We'll never know who this young man is. We'll never know where he grew up. Did he marry? Did he have a farm?" He mentioned a lot of things, but he did say that he talked about it being a son and honored the unknown soldier in the right way. He also received the flag as the family member on behalf of a grateful nation. And he also presented the Congressional Medal of Honor to the unknown soldier for being selected to serve in the Tomb of the Unknowns. There was criteria in that congressional language, but each of the unknown soldiers, World War I, World War II, Korea, and the Vietnam unknowns, were all presented a Congressional Medal of Honor, and those Medal of Honors are still on display up at the Tomb of the Unknowns. So that was in 1984. And then in 1986, I'm going to keep skipping forward. I know there's some gaps, but in 1986, there was a book written called The Missing Plane, It's by Susan Sheehan, and it's a book about finding remains in Vietnam and how they identified them at the Central Identification Lab in Hawaii. It is called something different, the Defense Personnel Accounting. It has a different name now, but it was still the Central Identification Lab. But in this book, there's just a short few paragraphs, but very specific information about the unknown soldier. And it talks about the date the unknown was killed, on May 11th of 1972, where the unknown was killed, 60 miles north of Saigon, which is An Loc. What artifacts were found? Remnants of a flight suit, a pistol holster, a parachute, a one-man inflatable raft, approximate age and height of the unknown soldier. The designation was X-26, unknown, but had the number 26. And it also talks about the number of bones that were found. There were very few bones that were found of the unknown soldier. So it was interesting because there was a Dr. Fiore who was in charge of the lab. He was an expert in identifying remains, so they said. And they didn't have DNA back in the day, but they used an anthropological formula to say how tall you are or how old you are. And this doctor was asked to go to Washington and recommend to the National League of Families that X-26 be chosen as the unknown soldier. And he declined to go. He believed that if additional remains of X-26 were ever found, he could identify him. But on April 13th of 1984, Caspar Weinberger, who was our Secretary of Defense at the time, designated X-26 as the remains that would be buried at Arlington. Johnny Webb, who still works at the Central Identification Lab in Hawaii, Tadeo Fiore, the doctor, he has passed. They refused to discuss the Vietnam unknown, she wrote. Putting X-26 in the Tomb of the Unknowns was politically expedient, a former sergeant says. At best, it was premature. I'll bet Doc considered him unidentified but not unidentifiable. Perhaps it was appropriate to the Vietnam War, she wrote. So much else about it was political. Everything connected with X-26 has been shredded, but you can't shred what's in men's minds. If we ever get into Vietnam, South Vietnam, the way we got into Laos and find additional remains that match those in Arlington, there could be a problem. So this book had some very specific things about an unknown soldier that we weren't really supposed to know any specifics about. An unknown soldier is known but to God. And the documents would say that everything associated with an unknown soldier were to be shredded. I'm going to skip from 1986 up to 1994, when Ted Sampley called, my mother. He is a former Green Beret, a radical. Oh my goodness gracious. He protested. He believed we left POWs and MIAs knowingly in Vietnam. He would go to Washington and he'd make havoc. And so he had quite the reputation. And I did not know him. He said, my mother just really couldn't deal with this. So she had him call me. I was at Dobbins, captain at the time. And Ted said, Pat, I know where your brother is. I read this book, The Missing Plane, and I've researched the information about the plane that went down and about your brother and all those kind of things. And it's him. I believe it's him. So I called the Air Force Personnel Center casualty office, and he goes, just research it, take a look. But he was going to go ahead and publish this article in his dispatch in North Carolina anyway. And from what I understand, there were already rumors about this whole thing with Michael being in the tomb. And so I called the casualty office and I said, hey, this is the craziest story. This is what's being said to me. And they said, by no means is there anything to substantiate that your brother Michael is in the Tomb of the Unknowns. And I said, well, you know what? That makes sense to me because that's the craziest thing that I could ever imagine is a known soldier in the Tomb of the Unknowns. And I saluted smartly But that was in 94, but then in 1997, the same thing happened. An investigative reporter called my mother. My mother had him call me. I was at Cobb County at that time. And I said, he goes, Pat, I know Ted Sampley's reputation, but I researched the information, and I believe it's your brother. And I said, well, it's somebody that, we can't get these kinds of phone calls. My mother still is not over this. I mean, you never get over anybody that you lose anyway, I believe. And so I talked to my mom, and I asked her if she would be willing to sign an affidavit so that we could work with Vince, so that any document with Michael Blassie's name on it that was releasable, that he could get through the Freedom of Information Act. And because Vince was really the one that was doing the research as we coordinated during that year that I was my first year at Cobb County. So she was happy to do that because she believed her son was there. And I know I'm a mother, I am not a mother, but mother's intuition, there's something to be said about it. So when the documents started flowing as we were doing the research, this is what we weren't told about Michael. That a Vietnamese reconnaissance team, along with U.S. Army officers, were sent into Michael's crash site to find Michael Blassie, and he was found on October 31st of 1972. He found his remains. They found his artifacts, they found his ID card, and he was bundled up reverently, is what now retired Colonel Parnell told me. He was a captain at the time, bundled up reverently, put on a helicopter, and sent to Saigon. I'm just going to go through a couple of documents. I don't want to bore anyone, but this is the radio control log. It might be like an eye test, but you can see October 31st of 72, and then Michael Blassie, ID card, and compass. So they documented that they actually found him on this radio control log. They also documented that he was received at the mortuary in Saigon. Some of the things that were found with him, some of the documents have a few different things, but most of them, as far as the artifacts go, but most are the same. This is a little bit different, but this one, he was received with his remains and some of the documents that are artifacts that were with him, along with his ID card. So we knew that he was received at the mortuary. This is a skeletal chart of the bones that were found of Michael. Very few, as you can see, the blackened areas. And you can see at the top it says BTB, Michael Blassie. And I was like, what is BTB? And I guess it was believed to be, I'm not sure how the confusion started. Some questions I can't answer. But you'll see at the bottom some of the same things, the flight suit, one-man inflatable raft, some of the same things that were remnants of a parachute were all found with Michael. Then in 1978, Taddeo Fiore, the expert in identifying remains, wrote this anthropological narrative. He said that the remains that were found 60 miles north of Anlock with Michael Blassie's name associated with it, that the age of those remains with his anthropological formula were 26 to 33 years old. It says that, so Michael was 24, so he missed that by 2 years. It says that his living stature was from a range of 65.2 to 71.5, and Michael was 72 inches tall, so he missed the range by half an inch. He also talked about a small quantity of body hair, light brown, and it was, they tried to match it to Michael's blood type, and it didn't match. This part is just very difficult for me because Michael was found in 1972. His remains and artifacts went to Thailand, then to Hawaii. Now we're talking 1978. They're talking about Michael's remains. And I don't know, he's been sitting on the shelf for that long, and I'm not sure whose hair that they were trying to match, but it wasn't Michael's. And so with those three things, missing the age by 2 years, the height by 1/2 inch, and that hair that did not match Michael's blood type, Dr. Fury recommended that Michael's name be taken away from those remains. So it was in 1980, 2 years later, that an Armed Services Graves Registration Office board met, and they took Dr. Fury's recommendation, took Michael's name away from those remains and named those remains X-26. That's 1980. So now we're getting into early 80s, where the push for a Vietnam unknown, and you look at the date of this Air Force position paper. I struggle with this paper as well. The Air Force wrote this paper saying that there's criteria for an unknown soldier, known but to God. You're not supposed to know, where someone was found, because if you know where they were found, you probably could identify who was found there. There's so many different things that the Air Force wrote about. It also said in this paper that no one at the Central Identification Lab meets the criteria of an unknown soldier. And then you'll look at the bottom, and I know, again, this is an eye test, but they had already taken Michael's name away from him, but it says X-26, Blassie, ID card lost, 10 to 15% remains. That was in 1981. In 1983, a Major Roger Wolforks, it's documented that he was researching the artifacts that were found with Michael. Whose were they, and where did they come from? And this is a document from the Air Force Personnel Center, just saying that that someone was researching the artifacts, and that at the bottom you'll notice that Stephen Graverock, he was one of Michael's classmates. He had already been found and interred at the academy, and that Michael Blassie was still BNR. So the last document that I'll show you today is a document, and now we're getting really close to May of 1984. This is a document written April of 1984, just a month or so earlier. And I call this my smoking gun document. It's written by Johnny Webb. I mentioned him. He still works at the lab. He has known Michael since he was an Army officer assigned to Thailand. It was his job to move the mortuary from Thailand to Hawaii, and he still works there as a high-ranking civilian today. This document is saying that the documents that I just showed you, the ASCRO board finding where it took Michael's name away from him, the statement by Captain Hess that he was found at the mortuary, and then the journal that said he was actually found, that these documents were going to be taken out of the X-26 file and placed in the Blassie file. And so that was where we said this person is one and the same of the unknown soldier in the Tomb of the Unknowns. It was at that point that I made binders for each of my family members, and my mother called a meeting. And it was getting very serious for us, because truth is tough. Truth is, when you're learning about things and you're going, what in the world? How could this be? But I've always contended that I'd rather know the truth. As hard and difficult as it might be. But so we met at my mother's home. Judy is now the oldest. We had the discussion of what to do. What are we going to do with this information? How does everybody feel about it? And Judy was like, well, I don't know if anybody's even going to care, because no one's cared up until now. No one's tried to, tell us where he is, or... and my mother at this point was still getting letters from that organization saying they're going to go into Vietnam to try to find Michael. So then there's Mary, who's the middle child, and she was like, wait a second, Michael would come and find me if I was lost. I think we should move forward on this. And then my brother George, who, again, he's the youngest, he goes, but it's such an honor to be buried at the Tomb of the Unknowns. It's sacred ground. And then we talked about that. Is it sacred ground when it's a known soldier in the Tomb of the Unknowns? How do you reconcile something like that? And then on top of that, as the discussion went on, my brother George then goes, well, wait a second. Michael's a hero. Served his country. He deserves to be known. And we talked about that. What's in a name? What is the importance of names? And I was thinking about that. I think about it a lot because the Vietnam Memorial that's in Washington with 58,000 names on it, how impactful that is. And we go there and we look at names and we remember the people, and yet we have this unknown and this Tomb of the Unknowns, which is very honorable, but what does that mean, you know? And because when I meet somebody, the first thing my name is Patricia, what is your name? Our name is important. And one of our former directors, Bob Hightower, Navy SEAL, he goes, Blassie? I know you guys can remember how he sounded. He goes, what does a veteran put on their tombstone? They put their name, the years they served, and the service that they served in. He goes, go find your brother. So after the bantering of my family that day, my mother was very patient. She's a very patient, but in inner strength that I never even knew she had. But she looked at her children and she said, I want to bring my son home. I want a tombstone with his own name on it. And so we looked at one another and we made a pact. We said, we're going to stick together. I said, this is going to be big. They said, what do you mean it's going to be big? I said, I don't know what that means. All I know is we're going to confront the U.S. government on national news, and we're going to say we want to bring Michael home. The trail leads to the tomb, and we want to know the truth. And that was our messaging the entire time. And that was on January 19th of 1998, and our government's response was pretty swift. They established a task force. They researched the same documents that we did, but I know that there's more that they had access to that we didn't. They interviewed those involved, but they had access to people who would not talk to us, like Johnny Webb, Caspar Weinberger, some of the others high-ranking people who were involved in this whole mission of the unknown soldier. So, it was not long after, that was January of 19th, the task force was established, and on May 7th of 1998, then Secretary of Defense Cohen said that, yes, we will honor the Blassie family's request to do and disinter the remains from the Tomb of the Unknowns to do DNA testing. He said, we take these measured steps to disinter a Vietnam unknown due to the advancement in technology. And that is true. But it was more than that. It was clear in the documents. It was clear in the firsthand accounts. And when the Blassie family said, yeah, we'll do DNA testing, I honestly didn't understand DNA testing. It was relatively new, as you probably all know much better than me, but what we said was that we'll do whatever it takes. And Jean Blassie, a mother, will go to great lengths to identify their sons, to do whatever it takes for their children. But you would really be proud, the Air Force team that came from Scott Air Force Base, they were so sharp. They were a little nervous, but they took my mother's blood. But she would tell you, if she was standing here today, that she did not do this for herself because she knew where he was. She did this for the Congress, the media, and the American people so that the people would believe what we found in the documents and the research that was done. So that was on May 7th where he made that announcement. The disinterment began on May 13th, just a few days later. This is being sacred ground. They cordoned it off from all media, but not to say that the old guard wasn't doing their job. They still were doing their job during this disinterment ceremony. So this is the evening of May 13th. The work was incredible. And I didn't show a very good picture, I don't think, but the tomb that is outside of the ground is where World War I is buried. In front of, as you see here, in front of that tomb are 3 crypts. The 3 crypts are World War II, Vietnam, and Korea. I believe it's World War II is on this side. It could be the other way. But Vietnam was in the middle crypt. So the work was incredible of what they had to do. They took off the marble slab, and then they found that there was a concrete slab that they didn't anticipate. And so they worked through the night to disinter the Vietnam unknown. And then they finally got to the casket. And I wanted to be there, but they wouldn't allow me because I wasn't a family member. But I will tell you, I was so distrustful at this point that I was concerned that, oh, what if they try to fool us? What if something happens, you know? And then I thought, if they open the tomb, I just know the ID card's going to be in there. So I had all these thoughts, and so but they weren't healthy. They weren't healthy thoughts. But I see by the pictures, very meticulous with the process, right? And but they wouldn't allow me because I'm not a family member. He hasn't been identified yet. And so we just waited to hear the news. And we flew up to Washington for the disinterment. You know, this time we flew. and so the next day, they had cleaned up the Tomb of the Unknowns as if nothing had happened. And that is the unknown soldier from Vietnam. And this is the ceremony. And Secretary Cohen presided over that ceremony that day. The unknown soldier was then taken to the Armed Forces Institute of Pathology for the DNA test. You'll see it's still a multi-service color guard. We don't know what service this person belongs to. This is just a picture of, there was a lot of things going on with the area there. And they sent to the scientist Mitch Holland and his team. It was a blind analysis, so they didn't know which was Michael's when they went to do the test. And it's because of Mitch Holland that I have these photos, and I'm very, very grateful to him for that. So that was May 14th. I got a call at the last week of June saying, and I had to go to my leadership again and say, I've got to go. And they said, you need to get to St. Louis. Your mom's going to get a call, and this was going to be June 30th of 1998. And Secretary Cohen called Jean, my mom, and as we sat around the phone with her, and he said, Mrs. Blassie, you can finally bring your son home after 26 years. It's Michael. It was the closest match of DNA that the scientists had seen at that time. And I know there's much more advancements since then. So during this whole time, there was a lot of media involvement, and going back to my training and everything that I learned in this county alone, at Dobbins, the Chamber, and Cobb County government, we set up a command post in my mother's apartment. And that's my Air Force training. We had the fax, the internet. The media would come. The morning shows. They'd set up in her place, and then when everybody knew we were going to get this call, and how the media works and the leaks and all of that, and so they were outside waiting for my mother to come out and make a statement. And so this is probably the happiest picture I have of the 5 of us ever. It's because we were like, we found him. We found him. We won. and then we were like, whoa, wait a second, It was sort of sad. We lost him too. But anyway, we knew the rest of the story, which was very, very important across the board, I think, for us in particular. So that was June 30th, and so it took a couple of weeks for us to get our act together, and on July 10th of 1998, George, who had never been part of the military, never had flown on a military aircraft, we sent him up to Dover, said, bring your brother home. And this is the day George got his wings. And he was so proud to walk with his brother and bring him home. And so then the following day, on July 11th, Secretary of Defense and Mrs. Cohen came to honor Michael and meet with my mother. And Mr. De Leon, who was in charge of the task force, I'm so thankful to him that he saw clearly, and they didn't try to, he just said, these are the documents, we need to do the test, because it was so clear in so many different ways. So it was a grand day. About 4,000 to 5,000 people came to the celebration of Michael's life. We buried him at Jefferson Barracks in St. Louis, the National Cemetery there. This is his tombstone. The lady that we thought he'd marry came. The flight lead came. His roommate from Vietnam, some classmates. But really, many Vietnam veterans came who never had the chance to bury their buddies, right? So it was a day of celebration, but it wasn't just our celebration. It affected so many different people in so many different ways. During this time frame, when I knew it was Michael, I had gone to a Gaither concert, and there was a lady named Janet Paschal, and she is an inspirational singer. And I met with her on her bus, and I said, Janet, will you please come to my brother's funeral? They're going to tell us it's him, and we're going to bring him home in July. July 11th is the ceremony. And I said, will you sing Another Soldier's Coming Home? And she said that she didn't think that she was going to be able to make it. She was supposed to be in Alaska for another tour. But during the whole thing, all of a sudden, we got the word that Janet was coming. She's going to sing this song. She had written this song, Another Soldier's Coming Home, in honor of her father, who was a Christian and a minister. And I have a video where the local news took the song and laid pictures from the ceremony over the song. And so I will show you this video, and then we'll conclude. So.
The sacrifice he made for his country, but also the sacrifices made by other veterans.
News 4 photojournalist Randy Cathcart put together this special tribute for Blassie and all veterans who proudly served their country.
His back is bent and weary, his voice is tired and low, his sword is worn from battle and his steps have gotten slow. But he used to walk on water, or it seemed that way to me. I know he moved some mountains and never left his knee. Strike up the band, assemble the choir, another soldier's coming home. Another warrior hears the call he's waited for so long. He'll battle no more. He's won his wars. Make sure heaven's table has room for at least one more. Sing a welcome song, another soldier's coming home.
I loved my brother for what he believed, and I loved my brother because he believed in America.
His memory lives on. I love Michael. He is a great man.
He faced the winds of sorrow, but his heart knew no retreat. He walked in narrow places, knowing Christ knew no defeat. But now his steps turn homeward, so much closer to the prize. He's sounding kind of homesick. There's a longing in his eyes. Strike up the band, assemble the choir. Another soldier's coming home. Another warrior hears the call he's waited for so long. He'll battle no more. He's won his wars. Make sure heaven's table has room for at least one more. Sing a welcome song. Another soldier's coming home. Sing a welcome song. Another soldier's coming home.
He's the best. You couldn't have had a more better representative as the unknown soldier. And I'm sorry if I'm getting a little quiver-lipped. This is hard to talk about. He was that good. He really was.
Thank you. So we were very, very thankful the way the things unfolded. Behind closed doors, we would say what we wanted to say to one another. When we came out from behind closed doors, we wanted to be a positive family, and but we wanted to show that we were united, and there is strength there when you put forward a unified front, as we all know, in all of our capacities. I did consider stepping away at that time. As I said, the truth was hurting. I was like, how could, I got disenchanted. I was like, what is going on? But I had to reconcile in my own mind, this happened. This is over here. It doesn't have to bleed over into every other area of my life. See it for what it is. And at that point, instead of walking away, which I had considered, I decided I'd become the best officer I could ever be, which to the best of our ability, that's what we do. And control, we don't have much control, but with what I'm put in charge of, I would do my very best, that things would be done rightly as they could be. So that was my charge. But through it all, I was here in Cobb County. And I just, being invited back, James Hudgens, and when you called, I just really wanted to come and tell the people here of Cobb County that your graciousness, your support throughout my growth at Dobbins, with the chamber at Cobb County, I wouldn't be who I am today if I had not worked here and gotten to know each and every one of you. So I thank you very much for this opportunity. And I just can't tell you, and I know there's many dignitaries, some I have not met, but if I could name each one of you, I would. So I don't mean to slight protocol, but I do thank you for allowing me to share with you today this story about my family and our journey. So I appreciate it. Thank you.